I've been thinking a lot about what to say over Toriyama's passing, and it always ends up being a mixture of words that just don't seem to come out right. But I guess that's kind of how it is with these things. Plus, there's not much else that I could end up saying that hasn't been said already. Series like One Piece would not be what they are today if it weren't for him. I read several of the statements that were made by some of the mangaka, and one that really stood out was a line from Kubo's statement, the creator of Bleach. He said, "I've always believed that creating things means expanding your sensibilities and expanding your life. This is because I believe that as long as the work exists, the author is not dead." And I think the reason for why that resonated with me is because I do subscribe to the idea that people who are creators, I do think that they are trying to sort of venture into trying to touch some degree of immortality through their work. So with that in mind, I find it very strange to say goodbye to someone who I simultaneously have not met, but also someone who I think is very much alive and well in the energy and inspiration that he left upon the world. So instead, I'll just say, good job, Toriyama. You lived one heck of a life.
The language that's used in the description of the cover story gets me to think that Yamato will be visiting Ryuma's grave at some point. Maybe we'll see Shusui be displayed on an altar or something like that. I also think it's interesting that in the last chapter, Oda decided to go underwater to Old Wano and Onigashima, and now we're nowhere near that area. So I hope that means that maybe he'll be connecting two different narrative threads together by the end of this, because one perspective is obviously going to be Yamato's. So I hope we can also get a second perspective from another character or characters, like the Tobiropo. Now, a point I made from very early on, the moment I saw Saturn arrive in Egghead, was that his powers didn't feel and seem normal to me. I made an entire video trying to drive the point home that the Gorosei might actually just be demons. And I think this chapter pretty much confirms my suspicions. Because again, when have we ever seen a summoning circle be used to summon a mythical type Zoan? I mean, we kind of saw a similar effect in Film Red when Top Musica, aka the Demon King, showed up, but that's an actual demon. That's just what he is. You just need Uta's Paramecia power to summon him, but that's about it. And then another huge hint we get here is that if the elders were in fact double fruit users, Oda would have included the name of their fruits in the description box where we get the reveal of their animal forms. Like we would have gotten something like Saint Marcus Mars, user of the mythical bird fruit, model Itsumade, something like that. Or like somebody like Saturn, we would have gotten the ox fruit, model Gyuki. But we don't get any of that for any of them. We just get the name of the actual yokai. And so it takes me back to Marco saying that when Whitebeard would get drunk, he would often talk about a time where, atop of the red line, there was a land of gods, except now it's the land of the devils, because the gods lost and the devils took over after the War of the Void Century. On that note, speaking of yokai, my very first impression when I first saw the 5 elder silhouettes in Marijoa was that they reminded me of Big Mom's incarnations, which were basically these kind of independent tax-collecting blobs that worked for Big Mom because they were part of her soul. And so the idea that we've seen Big Mom use her soul powers to create a specific type of homie in Wano that are essentially kind of a reference to Japanese yokai called the Tsukumogami, I think that's kind of what's going on with Imu and the Gorosei. The Gorosei are just an extension of Imu. So if it turns out that Imu got the Obi Obi no Mi immortality surgery done on them, and the Gorosei are an extension of Imu's body and essence, it would make sense why they have the ability to regenerate. I'm pretty sure Jupiter will be shown to be able to heal himself or reattach his head to his body next chapter. I also like how since he's the youngest looking Gorosei, he also has the design that is based off of the most modern monster. Because all the other ones seem to stem from like older folklore or Asian tales or, legends. And then Jupiter's just like, I'm the sandworm from Dune. So he appeals to the younger generation. He's like, hello kids, I show up in a movie featuring Zendaya. And speaking of worms from distant places, during the NL cover story that features him on the moon, we actually see another sandworm-like being who's a part of the space pirates, except he has arms. So again, the fact that this worm is in space, and last chapter we saw Saturn spinning like a UFO to attack Luffy, is more evidence that points to this idea of alien races in the past coming down from the sky to live in the One Piece world. Also, I'm pretty sure that the scene by the end with Dory and Brage slicing the sandworm is a reference to them slicing up 2 dinosaurs back when they were first introduced in Little Garden, except now they're doing it together. Because back then it was only Dory who saved Luffy from being eaten. In addition, even though it's well known that some of the top-ranking Marines, such as the Admirals and some Vice Admirals, have an animal theme to them that corresponds with the Chinese zodiac, and even though it's also well known that the Gorosei are meant to represent a planet each, I also think it's interesting that if you think about it, each of the elders can also go along with an animal in the Chinese zodiac. So Saturn is the ox, Jupiter would be the snake, Mercury is the boar/pig, Mars is the rooster, Venus would be the horse, and Shanks is the rat. Now, the reason for why it makes narrative sense for Imu to have several lives or some degree of immortality here is because we literally saw the main character come back to life during the Wano arc. Luffy literally has the power to restart his heart now, so you always want to make sure that the main character and the antagonistic force of the story can challenge each other and put each other in check with their abilities. Speaking of Imu, there's only one silhouette that remains a mystery from that scene with Sabo in the throne room, and that's the one that looks like this. So I'm pretty sure that that's Imu's form, and again, the way that it's represented there really reminds me of the design of Big Mom's incarnations / part of her soul. Also, if we want to keep making connections, according to the TCB scans, the horse yokai for Venus Judo is called the Bakotsu and is said to be the vengeful spirit of a horse that burned to death. And so, where else have we seen something like that in this story? Well, with Kanjuro, right? Because he was able to summon the Kazembo near the end of Wano. And not only is the Kazembo a yokai that is supposed to represent the spirit of a burning monk that lit himself on fire to detach from the material world in order to attain some degree of enlightenment, but unfortunately failed to do so, but in One Piece, the Kazembo is also supposed to be the representation of Kanjiro's hatred and soul. So again, the whole thing ties into the idea of Imu splitting up his or her soul into different parts, Voldemort style, and creating each of the elders that way. And now that I think about it, I wonder if that's what gave Vegapunk the idea to split his brain power into different sections and create the satellites for himself. Because we have that cover page where he's meeting the Gorosei and Vegapunk's head is still intact. So maybe he found out about the elders in Imu and was like, oh, this seems like a good idea.
Now, the official translation refers to Mercury's boar monster as Feng Shi, so I'm just going to read you what I found about it. This is from Wikipedia. Feng Shi, also known as Hoki or Hokai, is a boar-like monster in Chinese mythology. He is said to have 2 heads and lives in the Moros forests. Some accounts refer to it as the ancient rain deity. It says here that whenever it shows up, it starts to rain. So it'd be cool to see Jinbei and Nami team up against it at some point. Its description says that it's supposed to have 2 heads, but I only see 1 in this chapter, so maybe he has a second one in hiding. And when it comes to Marcus Mars, the Itsumare is actually a bird that is considered a bad omen. It's basically a giant bird that shows up in places where there's a lot of suffering. Its name comes from its cry of Itsumare mo, which means until when. So it basically shows up at a place where there's been a lot of suffering, and it starts crying out, until when? Until when will this suffering continue? What's interesting is that according to the folklore and the legend, both the Feng Shi / the Hokai, the giant boar, and the Itsumare were both defeated and killed by warriors who were archers. So I wonder if that means anything for Usopp.
We've been pretty deprived of cool, useful Usopp moments recently, so I was so happy to see that Oda actually gave him something to do here. He actually stopped the Sunny from crashing into the dome using his Midoriboshi bamboo javelin. So I thought that was really good. And it would seem that it only took a dig from Sanji for Zoro to stop stalling and apparently finish Lucci off. Emphasis on apparently, because again, Lucci is an awakened Zoan, so given the information that we get here, I can't confirm if he's actually done for quite yet, but it pretty much seems that way. Regardless, I do think that chapter 1111 will feature something to do with Zoro, because not only is Venus Judo running around the perimeter of the island, unleashing some of his Brook-like Chill of the Underworld ice powers to disable the Mark III Pacifistas, but the conversation with Lucci also contains some degree of foreshadowing, because Lucci asks Zoro, don't you want to find out where the strong Haki is coming from? Also, during the clash, we see that one of Zoro's swords spins off into the air, and though it's actually kind of hard to identify what sword it is, all I know is that it can't be Wado Ichimonji, because that's the one that Zoro uses in his mouth, but I just can't tell if the sword that's sent flying is Enma or Shodai Kitetsu. Regardless though, the point that I'm about to make is the same.
So we already know that Shodai Kitetsu and Enma both have like a spiritual thing going on, because Enma is always trying to kill its user by absorbing a ton of Haki from them, and then Shodai Kitetsu is said to be cursed. And we also saw Enma react to the sound of Hiyori's shamisen. And I've often seen it used in fiction where items that are weapons or used for self-defense typically kind of have like their own personality or essence to them. Like in Lord of the Rings, Bilbo's sword Sting, which he later inherits to Frodo, actually has the feature that it turns blue when orcs are nearby. In Harry Potter, Voldemort and Harry have wands that are made out of the same phoenix core, so in Goblet of Fire they end up connecting through like a magical thread. All of this to say, what if part of the reason for why Zoro's sword spun off is because it's actually sensing Venus Judo being on the island? Again, I can't really tell which sword it was that spun away. It works best if it actually turns out that it was Sandai, so I'm gonna read you this. This is straight from the wiki. The katana that Saint Ethan Baron Venus Judo possesses bears some similarity in terms of the design of the hilt and the rounded cross on the handle that both Nidai Kitetsu and the Sandai Kitetsu possess. The katana's name is currently not known, and whether this is a coincidence or there might be an underlying connection is also unknown. So just to get it out of the way, I think that Ethan has the Shodai Kitetsu, which is not only one of the top 12 supreme grade swords, but it's also a superior version of what Zoro has, the Sandai Kitetsu, as well as the Nidai Kitetsu that we saw back in Wano. I mean, Venus Judo is disabling Mark III Buccaneers with one slash of this thing. It reminds me of that scene during Kuma's flashback where before Zoro takes Luffy's pain, Kuma's actually thinking to himself, I might actually pass out from this as a buccaneer. So yeah, Zoro confronting or at least running into Venus Judo is pretty much a given at this point. It goes along perfectly with Zoro declaring in Wano that he will become the king of hell. At first I thought that was kind of a weird statement, but it's pretty obvious that Oda's been taking the time to flesh out that concept a lot more. Because we have the whole thing with the Grim Reaper in Wano that went unexplained. Also, each of the Kitetsu swords are said to be cursed. And so if it turns out that Ethan actually has the Shodai Kitetsu, which is a cursed sword, it'd be like, well, so what, you know? He's already an evil spirit. Also, part of Zoro's character arc in becoming the king of hell is for him to be able to dominate and overpower the will of these cursed swords. So many references to death and the underworld in this chapter. I mean, honestly, the first time I saw the Bokotsu for the first time, I honestly thought that it was supposed to be a reference to one of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. We also have the name of Hahaba used in Zoro's attack against Lucci, which is supposed to be one of the 8 cold hells in Buddhism. Everything seems to be pointing to chapter 1111 being one hell of a chapter. No, but seriously, Zoro running into Venus Judo, it's definitely going to give Zoro's goal of becoming king of hell more focus. A lot of the speculation during the beginning of Wano was that Zoro was going to replace Sandai Kitetsu for the Nidai Kitetsu that we saw in Wano. And obviously that never happened. But I feel like if Ethan does have the Shodai Kitetsu, it doesn't really matter. Because I think the point of that theory was that we just wanted Zoro to upgrade his Kitetsu sword. So if he ends up getting the Shodai eventually near like the end of the series or whatever, it doesn't really matter. You can skip the Nidai. Something else too when it comes to the Gorosei is that, you know, so far we've seen 2 hybrid forms, right? Saturn's and Venus's. And I remember that when Saturn's introduction took place, Oda kind of showed us kind of like a more sinister application of what appears to be King's Haki, where Saturn's intimidation is actually able to blow up somebody's head. And so I noticed that he also ends up showing us something different here when it comes to Venus's observation Haki. Because as he's galloping around, his Haki allows him to just zoom into that pacifista through like trees and bushes and stuff. It's super exact. He gets high quality definition images with his observation Haki, as opposed to how we've seen it be depicted in the past, where we just get vague silhouettes and outlines. Also, I kind of wonder if like Mars was intentionally crashing into the dome so that he could sort of explode and then kind of come back to life like a phoenix on the other side within the barrier now. I feel like the story of One Piece is gradually evolving from being about pirates versus the government to being more about heaven versus hell. And I think this panel perfectly encapsulates that feeling. And so I want to bring up Oda's statement about Toriyama's passing, because in the last paragraph he writes, I would like to offer my deepest respect and gratitude for the vibrant, creative world that Toriyama left behind, and pray from the bottom of my heart for him to rest in peace. I hope heaven is as delightful as you imagined it in your manga. And so that last line speaks volumes about the amount of influence that Toriyama had and has over Oda, to the point where if we go back to that scene in Alabasta where Robin is pretending to decipher the poneglyph for crocodile, she does mention that the poneglyph, according to her, right, that the poneglyph mentions that there used to be a time known as the Year of Heaven, or the Age of Heaven. Now, whether that's actually true or she was just making it up on the spot so that Crocodile wouldn't find out what the poneglyph actually said, we don't know for sure, but I think it's true. I think that's a fact that she just let slip. Because ultimately, like as I said in my last video, that's kind of what One Piece is about at its core. It's about how do we recapture that time, that Age of Heaven that the devils, the demons, the world government took away from us. How can we go back to that time? Thank you so much for watching, guys. I hope you have a great week. I hope you enjoyed the chapter as much as I did. Take care, and I'll catch you guys later. Bye.